On October 7th, a day that now lives in infamy across the Middle East and world, Nigerian forces shot and killed 1,000 innocent men in Asaba, the capital of the Eastern Delta region in Nigeria. The massacre took place almost 60 years ago, but the Nigerian government has still not apologized for their actions, leaving deep pains and wounds within the Asaba community. But, in spite of the echoes of silence from the Nigerian government, the people of Asaba have spoken up and fought not just for greater recognition of the massacre, but for the individuals that were senselessly murdered in cold blood on that day. Rose Nduka Eze was the only woman killed in the massacre. She died standing up to the authorities and believing in what she thought was right. Her son, Chuck Nduka Eze, has continued to carry on that message today, affirming that truth is the only path forward, no matter how difficult it may be to face. Nduka Eze has also been one of the most effective voices in raising awareness for the Asaba Massacre as a lawyer, activist, and entrepreneur. For one, upon constitution of the Special Panel of the Human Rights Violation Investigation Commission of Nigeria, most notably known as the Oputa Panel, Nduka Eze was chosen to represent the Anioma community and testified on the unlawful mass killings of civilians in Asaba during the Nigerian Civil War. Most recently, however, Nduka Eze produced a documentary film on the Asaba Massacre, which is set to premiere at the African Center in London on October 26th, details of which can be found at www.asabamemorialmassacre.org. It is now my absolute pleasure to share with you guys the fascinating conversation I had with Chuck Nduka Eze on my podcast, the Icarus Inspired Podcast. I bring that to you now. So, Mr. Nduka Eze, thank you so much for being here and continuing to shed light on this important event in history.
Well, thank you very much, Atan, for having me. I'm also very pleased and grateful that you consider this just as important as it's supposed to be.
Of course, of course. And I think a good place to start would be for those, like I said, who are listening, who are not from Nigeria, who are not from West Africa, to talk about what is Asaba, where is Asaba in Nigeria, and to give a brief background on the history of Asaba in Nigeria.
Oh, thank you very much. Essentially, in the colonial times, Asaba was actually the administrative headquarters of what was then the company that founded Nigeria. So Asaba could be said to be the first capital of that part, the area today called Nigeria. Well, you have the south, you have the north. Asaba is placed right at the western end of Nigeria. In fact, it's actually the last town between what is the southwest and the southeast of Nigeria. And as you would hear later, this was actually to form quite an important aspect of what transpired in the issue we're discussing. It's a little quiet old town, very peaceful. Well, happily peaceful today as well. Before that peace was compromised in the Asaba Massacre. So it's essentially the town that divides the southwest and the southeast of Nigeria.
When you meet somebody from Nigeria, one of the most common questions that follows after where are you from is which tribe do you belong to? which tribe do the Asaba people belong to? Are they Yoruba? Are they Igbo? Are they Hausa? Or are they another tribe?
Yes, Asaba people are Igbos. The Igbos who are resident in the Midwest, the Midwestern region of the country. You have a significant Igbo population between between Asaba and Agbo, and the what you refer to as Anioma is actually the Igbo aspect of Delta. So they're essentially Igbos both by language and by ethnic origin.
I understand that in 1967, there was another significant event that was happening in Nigeria at the time. Could you just talk about the context for which the Asaba Massacre occurred?
Yes, of course. Sadly, in 1966, I think it was, the civilian administration was interrupted by a coup, a military coup. This military coup was led by some young army officers who were dissatisfied with the way the country was being governed. Interestingly, quite a number of the officers who participated in the coup, quite a number of them were Igbos. There were also others from other ethnic groups. You had a lot of Igbos who held very high senior positions in the army at the time. But it is a fact that quite a number of the officers who participated in the coup were Igbos, and then some from other ethnic groups. The coup failed, but sadly, they killed the then prime minister of the country, Tafawa Balewa. They killed the premier of the northern region. This same coup also killed the premier of the southwest region. Given the nature in which the coup was sadly executed, it gave some sense of not only dissatisfaction, but some suspicion that because of the number of Igbo officers involved, that this could have been some kind of an Igbo agenda to interfere with what was then the governance structure of the country. So this suspicion seemed to have been widely held, certainly in the northern part of the country, and also in the southwest. So following the coup, there was then 6 months later what was referred to as a counter coup. This was essentially led by northern officers. In the north, you have most of the Muslims in the country are in the north. You also have some Christians, but I think it's predominantly Muslim. So a lot of the northern officers in the army who felt this sense of outrage that their senior ones had been taken away in that way, now planned what was now called the counter coup. And in this counter coup, they killed the military president. Following the failure of that initial coup I talked about, the most senior military officer in the country, then called General Iran, who also happened to be Igbo, now took over following the failed coup. He was now killed in this counter coup. And a lot of, it was a very bloody coup. And of course, the first one was also bloody. But this second one, quite a number of the senior Igbo officers in the military were essentially assassinated, which, as I explained, was considered a counter measure. So you can imagine the tension that ensued in the country. You have the first coup that led to a particular kind of feeling, and then you have the counter coup that only, even to some extent, made that feeling in other parts of the country even worse than it was. So there was a general sense of tension. Sadly, the counter coup did not only affect Igbo officers, there was something almost like a program in the northern part of the country. Northerners reacting against Igbos resident in the north. And there was a lot of massacre, a lot of killings. So this promoted a sense of fear and a sense of insecurity within the Igbo population generally. There was also hostility even in the southwest against Igbos. So there was a sense of fleeing back to the east, which is predominantly the Igbo area of the country. So quite a number of people were now returning home, as it were, back to the east to seek shelter. So this was the atmosphere in the country between 1966 and 1967, when events now turned into a civil war.
As I understand it, there was also a movement, the Biafra movement by many Igbos to secede and become their own independent state in Nigeria, were the Asabas also part of that movement?
Well, that movement had not actually existed prior to the events that we're now discussing. Nigeria was relatively a peaceful country. The ethnic groups were relatively living together side by side peaceably until these tensions that I alluded to. It was only following those tensions and following the general feeling within the Igbo population that they were no longer desired in Nigeria, or they were no longer welcomed in Nigeria, that this feeling that perhaps if they were to go back to their own territory, as it were, in the East, and then sort of that they would be safer if they did that. Now, I think there was some general conversation following the second coup that perhaps there was a better way that Nigeria could be held together to have some kind of loose federation structure. Conversations were held along those lines. That perhaps you could have the Eastern region as a federating structure. You could have the Southwest. Then you could have the Northern region. In fact, I think historically, the then president of Ghana had actually scheduled a meeting between the then federal government of Nigeria and the chap who eventually became the secessionist leader for Biafra, Ojukwu. There was a meeting in Ghana to see if this federating unit structure could work. I think following some agreements reached there that all parties signed up to, both parties came back to Nigeria, and that agreement, I think General Gowan, who was representing Nigeria at the time, felt unable to continue with what was agreed. And I think it was against that background that Biafra was now declared by Ojukwu, who was essentially the governor, the then military governor of the Eastern region. So the simple answer to the question is essentially that prior to 1966, there was really no sort of great quest for anything called Biafra. I think it was those very sad events and those tragedies that occurred within the country that led practically most Igbo people felt unwelcome with the events that were occurring. When one looks at it, it's actually quite sad, because people like me, my dad was actually a Nigerian nationalist. He fought the Brits, he fought for the independence of Nigeria. People like that, had a preference for the wider Nigeria. They were not that very keen to see Nigeria broken up. But in a situation where Igbo people did not feel safe within the country, and their safety could not be guaranteed by the existing governance structure in the country. I think the quest for Biafra became almost inevitable, but it wasn't actually the choice of many people. I think it became just an outcome that people embraced out of a sense of necessity. Well, following the breakup of the rapprochement that was being put together for this federating unit, Ojukwu declared the Republic of Biafra. This was unacceptable to the federal government of Nigeria. So they essentially said, no, you can't do that. And in the context of that, initially it was described as a police action, that the federal government was taking a police action to bring back the Southeast, which had been declared as Biafra, to bring them back into the fold. So of course, both sides did not share, the views of each other, and unfortunately, the war started. Now, just as I explained before, you had a lot of Igbos who had left different parts of Nigeria to return to the Southeast. Asaba being on the cusp of that Southeast, because it's the River Niger that actually sort of creates the distance between Asaba and the Southeast. So there's actually a very close proximity between Asaba and the Southeast. And as I explained earlier, Asaba people are essentially Igbos. So a lot of people had also come back to Asaba. So a lot of Asaba indigenes resident in other parts of Nigeria had also come back to Asaba. So following declaration of that secession and Nigeria's action to reunify the Southeast, the federal troops were now making their way to Biafra. But I think it's fair to say that prior to that, Biafran soldiers had also tried to make their way to the Southwest. They tried to come to Lagos. But it wasn't seen then as an aggressive step, because there was some general conversation, apparently, between the Southeast, which is Biafra, and the Southwest, in that if one succeeded, the other should also succeed. So there was some understanding, it seemed at the time, that what was happening by that incursion to Lagos was not meant to be aggressive. But it's fair to say that in the Southwest, it was considered aggressive. So that incursion had been attempted, and that there was a pushback, and the Biafrans had been pushed back to the Southeast. Now the war proper now started, and the federal troops of the 2nd Division of the Nigerian Army, led by a soldier, highly regarded soldier called Muritala Mohammed. He led the 2nd Division. Him and somebody called Lieutenant Colonel Ibrahim Taiwo were now leading the 2nd Division, as it were, to cross over to Biafra to essentially end the succession. Well, they got to, there had been some skirmishes, apparently, even before they got to Asaba. But when they got to Asaba, the records indicated that there was really no aggression from people who were residents from Asaba people. I think there was also a general feeling within a lot of Asaba people that they being on the federal side and they not particularly being interested in Biafra, because there was quite a significant aspect of Asaba population that were not keen on succession. And they felt, well, they're on the federal side, so they had nothing to fear, that the federal troops would protect them as they're making their way across to Biafra. But sadly, they got to Asaba, and the events that occurred there was perhaps not quite what the indigenes and the residents had expected. Now, if you were to ask me what did I think led to that or motivated that level of aggression, there was a general feeling that the chap who killed Sir Ahmadu Bello, Sadauna of Sokoto, who was a highly regarded and highly revered northern leader, was also not just a politician. He was the head of the Muslims, as it were. So he held various highly regarded positions. So he was seen as their leader. He was seen as a northern leader at the time. The chap who killed him in the first coup was said to be from Asaba. As it turned out, he's actually from a neighboring town, but Asaba loomed large in those days and was considered to be, most people that came from neighboring towns will normally say they're from Asaba to be able to identify more accurately, more in a way people would understand where they came from. So there was a feeling that the chap who killed Sadauna Sokoto was from Asaba. So there was a sense in which it was being seen as a revenge that when they get to Asaba, they would essentially teach the town a lesson for what had occurred. So from records that we have, quite a number of us were too young at the time. I feel that there was a sense in which it was said Asaba was relatively peaceful. The Biafrans had receded to the east. The soldiers got into Asaba around the 4th or the 5th of October. They now stayed in Asaba. It was thought perhaps they were preparing how to cross over because there's a bridge, there's a river, and there's the river Niger on the other side. So on the first day of their arrival, there were some sort of not very friendly sort of altercation between the soldiers and Asaba residents. And the leaders, I think, were you about to ask a question?
On the first day of their arrival, that is October 5th, or is that the night of October 4th?
It appears that they came in late-ish October 4th. But I think their presence was more felt October 5th. And there were not some very healthy exchanges between the soldiers and the residents. But killings had not really started at that point. But the leaders of the town felt that there's probably a need for them to interface with the troops, with the Nigerian troops, give them some confidence that they had nothing to fear from Asaba, that Asaba was actually compliant. Asaba was part and parcel of the federal territory. So following those conversations, I think it was suggested to them that they could all come out to welcome the federal troops on the 7th of October at a place referred to as Ogbosewe Square. So it was arranged that a lot of Asaba people should come out in their numbers to welcome the federal troops at that square as a way of showing loyalty, also perhaps as a way of the federal troops reassuring them publicly that they had nothing to fear. Our understanding of the position is that between that 5th and the 7th of October, it must have been perhaps a little clearer to Asaba indigents that this visit to the square might not actually be quite what it was sold to them as, because there had been a number of other incidents in the town. Soldiers were being really, really, really nasty to the local population. They were going into houses. Sometimes see they're looking for saboteurs, they're looking for Biafran soldiers, and of course, incidents like that always leads to a lot of friction. But what was certainly clear was that on the day of that massacre, which was the 7th of October, I think it was organized in such a way that Asaba has 5 villages, and this Ugbosewa is one of the villages. So people were now being essentially led from the various villages to this particular square where they were meant to assemble. And on the way of this rather sad journey, people could see that soldiers were going into houses and essentially forcing out people who probably did not want to go to the square. And in some cases, gunshots were being heard. So one can only imagine that the people who were being led to this procession were beginning to get a sense that it wasn't quite a happy occasion that they were going to attend at Obusewa Square. Our understanding was that they got to Obusewa Square, and the men were separated from the women. The men were all clad in white, as our people, when they're going for ceremonial occasions, all sort of wear white. The men were separated, and the women were separated. And machine guns concealed have been sort of hidden on one aspect of the square, facing where the direction where the men were. And orders were given by Lieutenant Colonel Taiwo, who is the deputy to Murtala Mohammed, for the shooting to commence. And of course, sadly, a frightful massacre took place in that location.
So the Asaba people were planning this. Was it a parade? It was a march of unity on the 7th of October. They had been planning for a while, or for 2 days, or why? How long had they decided that they were going to do this March of Unity?
My understanding was that there was a meeting between the elders of Asaba community and the head of the military division that were in Asaba. And it was following that meeting that it was suggested to Asaba leaders that perhaps they should come out to demonstrate the show of loyalty. So it could have been something that occurred between the 5th and the 6th. I can't speak to when the conclusion was reached, but certainly a decision was made that they should come out in their large numbers as requested by the federal troops to come to Ugbosewa. In fact, it was actually agreed that one of the senior sort of Asaba figures was actually to deliver a speech, a welcome address in that location. Somebody called Ogweshi Okobu. Okobu was to deliver the speech. So he'd actually written out the speech with him that he was to deliver on the occasion. Of course, he never made that speech because he was killed there.
Wow. So there was actually a movement of unity, and during that movement of unity, the federal government killed its own troops. Sorry, its own civilians.
Sadly, yeah. The troops of the 2nd Division of the Nigerian Army did that. And I suppose in terms of responsibility, the federal government ought to take responsibility for that.
Mr. Nduka Eze, I understand that although the massacre, the deaths were primarily men, around 1,000 men, there was also one woman who was killed during the massacre, and that woman is your mother. Could you speak a little bit about her and why she was also killed in the massacre?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, well, my mom and dad had actually left Nigeria as soon as independence was given to Nigeria. My father had fought for the independence, but his education had been truncated by his political activism. So following the achievement of independence, he carried on to the UK. He went to the London School of Economics and he studied law, scored to the bar by the Middle Temple. My mom was a nurse. But following the crisis 6 years later, 1966, there was a feeling that the country he fought for was now, in crisis, and people like him were actually being asked to come back home, not necessarily only by Igbos, because my father actually was part of what you call the Action Group. Action Group was a party formed by the highly revered Chief Obafemi Awolowo. Awolowo was considered to be the leader of the Southwest. My dad was a member of that party. So people like him were being asked to come back home and see what they can do to bridge the gap that seemed to be unfolding between the Southeast and the other part of the country. So my father answered that call and sadly came back with his young family. There was just me and my older brother. I was born in 1963, so in 1966, I would have been just 3 years old. My older brother was 5 years old. So it was a young family, and he came back with his young family. And because of the circumstances I explained before, we found ourselves in Asaba. So I suppose my mom, having a particular type of orientation, seeing people she considered to be federal troops who should be protecting citizens. They were actually within federal territory, and these were Nigerian troops within Nigerian territory. Asaba was within Nigerian territory. She felt inclined to remonstrate with the soldiers. This was not actually at the location of the massacre. I did say to you that they were going into various homes, and if they go there and they see anybody who was not participating in this march, all sorts of nasty things were taking place. So it was in the course of one of that, in her father's compound on the other side of Asaba, where she had gone to visit, that she encountered this situation. And she remonstrated with them and tried to speak to them. This is not the proper way for them to conduct themselves. And sadly, she was shot.
Where were you at the time that this happened, and how did you find out that your mother had died in this massacre?
Well, we were actually, it created a bit of a crisis, because when Asaba now fell apart, as it were, there was a lot of confusion. My grandfather on my mom's side was one of the people who felt that Asaba was safe, and that federal troops would protect Asaba citizens. And interestingly, on the other side, my father has been slightly more involved with discussions and things that were going on, was in the East at this particular time. He sent a car to pick us, and get us across to the East. And Asaba was falling, and my mom was not there. My mom was on the other side of Asaba with her daddy. So the car took us to Onitsha, which is across the Niger, and was meant to come back to go and get my mom on the other side of Asaba. And sadly, that never happened, because Asaba fell, essentially. Following the events I described, the Niger Bridge, which is the bridge that is between Asaba and Onitsha, was blown apart by Biafran troops, essentially supposed to make it very difficult or impossible for the federal troops to cross over. So movement between Asaba and Onitsha course, became virtually impossible. In any event, Asaba had come under very hostile occupation at this stage. So for the duration of the war, when we were in Biafra, we heard that because things do filter through. We did hear that my mom had been killed. And apparently, quite a number of people killed in those circumstances were buried in shallow graves. And, well, that's what we know of it.
I know that I keep saying 1,000 men were killed, but I know that there's different estimates of how many people actually died. What is your understanding of how many people throughout the course of those 3 days were actually killed by the federal troops?
Yes, it's actually extremely difficult to get an exact number because quite a number of people who were not even originally Asaba residents had come back to Asaba because of the tension in the country. So documentation had been a challenge. But what had to be done to get a reasonable estimate is that each village had to go through a process of compiling a list in the Asaba Palace, which is the king of Asaba. He set up a central location for this several years ago. And these names had to be proven. And over a period of time, a list was now put together. The official list is probably in the region, in the order of, like you just stated, like 1,000. But because you had even other non-Asaba residents, non-indigens who were also resident in Asaba, we're not in a position to actually say this is the exact number of people that died, but the order of 1,000 people seems perfectly reasonable.
Obviously, the massacre happened on October 7th, but the atrocities and the impact didn't end there. I know that the federal troops were still in Asaba, and many of the wives and family members of the people who were killed still had to deal with not only the grief of losing their loved ones, but also deal with the hostilities from the federal government. Can you speak to what happened in Asaba in the aftermath and the days following the October 7th massacre and how Asabas were treated even after that?
Yes, as we understood it, following the massacre, Asaba was essentially an empty town. It was a town devoid of men because a lot of the male population that were actually physically present had been killed. By our tradition, it's often not the position of women to conduct burials, digging graves and burying their loved ones. So you had a situation where the women were going to Ogbosewa, which was actually one location. There's yet another location in some other school where also some killings took place. But you had the survivors, mainly women, going in sort of wheelbarrows and going to those places and essentially trying to, because apparently it took about 2 days before the mass graves were now dug. So people were actually still piled up there. And, this high, sort of grief-stricken women were now picking up such bodies as they could identify and taking back to their houses and digging graves themselves and putting either their father or their brother or their husbands. So Asaba had quite a lot of, so it was essentially women that were in Asaba at the time, and they found ways. And of course, what hostile troops can be like. And there were all kinds of stories about the nature of interaction. that that took place. It was probably a bit too not the sort of thing one would like to talk about in polite society, but those things did take place, as happens in military occupations. Um, and if you have a minute or so, I would actually sort of give you an illustration of how this particular aspect found a very, very funny expression. Very many years ago, the king of Asaba, the gentleman that became the king of Asaba in the 90s, 80s and 90s, was actually a distinguished medical practitioner, but he was a professor of medicine in an Ivy League university in America. And he came back to Nigeria to become the king of Asaba. And many years later, some of his people he knew were coming to Nigeria, and they told them, "Oh, you probably need to go to so and so place and see and make a report on Asaba." For some reason, a study was being done, and Asaba was included. So they came to Asaba and they did their study. And as part of their findings, they came to a conclusion that Asaba must be a very progressive town because, unlike other places they had visited, this was the only place they went to. And women seemed to own their properties. They seemed to be landlords, landladies, unlike other places where it's normally men that held property assets. So they used that to say that Asaba was a very, very progressive society and was highly gender sort of forward-looking. To which the Asaba, when he read the report in his discussions with them, said to them that their observation was right, but the reason for that is that all the men that owned those properties had been killed in the war. And that's how their wives inherited those properties. And then he pointed out to them that if they noticed, they will see that quite a number of the houses had tenants because these women were having to live perhaps if it's a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom house, they all manage in 1 bedroom and they let out the other ones so that they can get some means of income. So it was a rather funny way of what was a really, really tragic observation, being seen in a totally different way by somebody who's not aware of the circumstances.
How long were the federal troops there? When did they leave Asaba finally?
Well, they did not really leave. Quite a lot of them crossed over to Biafra, but Asaba remained within military occupation throughout the duration of the war. Incidentally, and perhaps a senior Nigerian officer described this as karma. One of the colonels who was in Asaba gave a very helpful interview when they were putting together the book on Asaba Massacre. I think you know about the book by Professor Liz Bird and Fraser Otanelli. This gentleman was one of the people on the other side spoken to. And this colonel said to them that sadly, that almost 60% of the troops, of his troops, who had participated in the Asaba Massacre, lost their lives as they attempted to cross the River Niger. Either that they were blown up by the Biafran soldiers or the vessels that they were using capsided, but that almost 60% of his troops were lost in an attempt to cross over to Biafra. And he regarded that as an act of karma.
Speaking of consequences and karma, has there ever been any consequences besides what you just mentioned for the federal troops that did commit these atrocities in Asaba?
Sadly not. The first of all, one observation that is worth making is that there was almost total silence in relation to what had happened in Asaba during the war. I think the lead actually blew up not within Nigeria, but it was in the UK because one of the victims had written a letter to her brother, who was then in one of the Oxford colleges doing a PhD. So the brother received the letter, and she was in this letter describing the carnage that had occurred in Asaba and how they lost two of their brothers. They were shot right in front of their house. So her younger sister was describing this incident to the brother who was in Oxford University. So he got the letter. So he took it to a certain Baroness something who was in Oxford, and she sat in the House of Lords. So she now went to the House of Lords and raised a question in the House of Lords as a critique of the then Prime Minister and the Wilson government, who was actively actually supporting the Nigerian government, giving arms to Nigeria and all the rest of it. So an investigation was now ordered because of that secret that leaked, and it was following that apparently there were demonstrations even in the UK in relation to what was going on there. There was demonstration in America, but the Nigerian government at the time kept a very, very strong lead on the situation. People in Lagos really did not, in fairness to them, did not know what was going on in Asaba. Quite a number of them did not know the level of atrocities that were taking place even across in the southeast. Bombs were being dropped in civilian places. Bombs were being dropped in markets. Children were dying of kwashiorkor in the southeast. It was post the war that quite a number of these things became known. During the war, I think there was a very, very effective media sort of an attempt to, keep these things away from the media, such as the media was even in those days. So, following when the war ended, and people came back, and Nigeria was trying to restore herself to some normalcy. Certain questions now began to be raised, but any attempt to raise any issues around this Asaba massacre had always been visited with a lot of official hostility. And perhaps the reason for that is not too far-fetched, because the gentleman who presided the second division in Asaba within 6-7 years became a military head of state of Nigeria, Murtala Mohammed. So there's a strong infrastructure of loyalty and support for him. He was actually considered a very, very good soldier, but clearly what he did in Asaba is not something even the Nigerian government can be proud of. But there seems to be a desire not to, not to look into the matter properly, because it reflects rather badly on somebody that is seen to be somebody that seemed to be a representative of a particular structure, the governance structure in the country. So when I started this awareness, it used to be visited with a certain level of hostility. I've been a guest of the Nigerian security services on 2 occasions. I must say that they did not treat me. I wasn't treated in any nasty fashion. They were extremely interested and keen to find out if this was yet another attempt at resurrecting the Biafran spirit, or beginning another quest for, talking about Biafra. By the time I had the second visit, and I had conversations with them, I think matters became slightly better. But over the years, people weren't really allowed to open up memorials about the Asaba Massacre. Things have much improved since
then. I know that it hasn't been officially recognized by the Nigerian government, but has anybody in the Nigerian government since apologized for the actions that the Nigerian government took, either to you personally or officially?
Well, following various memorials and initiatives to raise some sort of awareness about the atrocities that occurred. Eventually, about 15 years ago or thereabout, the ex-president of Nigeria, the general who was the president during the war, General Yakubu Gowon, made a visit to Asaba and publicly apologized to Asaba community. The apology was highly nuanced because essentially he said he became aware of the atrocities when the war ended. That he was not aware of the atrocity when it took place. He was essentially apologizing as the person who was the president when those events took place. But he was also said to be doing so in his personal capacity, that he was not apologizing on behalf of the Nigerian government. Then on a personal level, Professor Lisbeth and Fraser Otanelli, following publication of the book, a certain interesting gentleman reached out to them, and he introduced himself as the son of Lieutenant Colonel Taiwo, whom I described was actually the second, the deputy to Muritala Mohammed, who gave the instructions for the shootings to commence. This gentleman said he was the son and that he wanted an opportunity to come to apologize to Asaba community for what his dad did during the war. So this was considered quite interesting and important by the professors. And they asked me if it was okay for our contacts to be exchanged so that I might have an opportunity to discuss with this gentleman. And of course, I said it would be a healthy thing to do. So our contacts were exchanged. He did get in touch. And we met. And he invited me to meet him at a golf course in Abuja. And I went to meet him. It turned out that he's also a very senior military officer. And as we speak, he's actually the head of Nigeria's military intelligence. But we had a very, very interesting conversation because essentially bared his heart to me and said that his dad, following the end of the war, had this morbid thing around him, was always saying he was going to be killed, was always thinking he was going to die. And his mom always worried about this. Each time the daddy was going out, there was always this idea, if I don't come back, don't be surprised. And so one day the mom confronted the daddy. Why are you so morbid? Why are you always talking about dying, death, shooting? And the dad said to the mom, in the presence of the children, I don't deserve to live because of what I did in Asaba. So he said he grew up under the cloud of this issue. And so when he read the book or heard about the book, started coming across the memorials, he felt the desire to do something, if only to beg for forgiveness for his daddy, to do so on behalf of his family. So given his role as a very senior army officer, of course, one had some strange feeling as to how credible this contrition and this desire to apologize was. Well, we felt in the circumstances that it was something worth pursuing because it will certainly bring some comfort to Asaba people. That even somebody who was directly associated with the massacre, that his own son is coming through to say sorry. So, following conversations with the then Asaba of Asaba, we decided to invite him to the next memorial. He did come for that memorial, having given me the indication that the military authorities had asked him to attend, but in his personal capacity. That he wasn't going to be speaking on behalf of the Nigerian army. He came to Asaba, but a day before the function, he called me to say that the consent of the military that he felt he obtained had been withdrawn, and he's been ordered to go back to Abuja, which is the place where the headquarters, from where he came. That anything he says cannot really be personal. That will always be associated with the Nigerian army. That when he retires and he feels like going to apologize, that he can do so. So that was about five years ago that we had this. Apart from that, we've not really had any proper sense of contrition, any sense of concern that something on that scale within any territory, even if they had gone to Biafra and they rounded up 1,000 civilians unarmed and killed them, it would still be a war crime. It's made more so when you actually do it within your own territory. So a responsible government is a continuum. It's not the present Nigerian government that was responsible for what occurred during the war. But things like that ought to be given a sense of place. There's a sense in which we feel that because of the way this sort of matters have been dealt with in the country over the years, it's created an atmosphere of impunity, which is not restricted just to military forces, that even generally, there's a sense in which people are not held accountable. So a sense of, if I can do it and get away with it, why not? Becomes the order of the day. So there's strong reasons why societies that want to progress, should not overlook atrocities of that magnitude. Even the death of one person, if somebody's accused of killing somebody, there's a long process of trial, that you go through in a legal process. Not to talk of when 1,000 people are rounded up. So it's one of those atrocities that really have received sort of a silent treatment, whether it be because even at the time, the international community mostly supported Nigeria. So there was a desire not to sort of shine lights on uncomfortable issues like the Asaba Massacre. And just before I finish, as you know, events in the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, bears the same date, incidentally. It's 7th of October. So when one thinks about it, if anybody hears 7th of October today, their mind just readily goes to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. But we did have ours. We had a 7th of October crisis in Nigeria that is very little regarded and very little reported. So it's just sheer coincidence that they share the same date.
If I was born in Lagos, I went to school in Lagos, my parents were from Lagos, would I grow up knowing about the Asaba Massacre? Or is this something that even within Nigeria, people are not aware that it actually happened?
I think what you just said would be more like it perhaps in the 90s and probably early 2000s, a lot of the Asaba memorial efforts actually builds on support of other Nigerians from other parts of the country, even Northerners, even Yorubas. I have a lot of people who have come in different ways to support the initiative that we're doing. So there's more awareness that has been created about it. We had the 50th anniversary, and the Nobel laureate, Professor Wole Soyinka, gave the lead address in Asaba for the 50th anniversary. He's Yoruba, and he gave that lead address. The Archbishop, the Catholic Archbishop, who also gave his address, is from the north. So there seems to be some sort of coalition, of a national coalition of interest. It's not, I won't say it's very, very highly, widely based as it should be, but there's something quite progressive in the sense that the awareness that is being created has actually built on fairly decent, good spread of Nigerians from different parts of the country. In fact, there was actually a program that I did with a son of one of the prominent Northerners killed in that first coup. His father was a highly respected Hausa Northern soldier, and he was killed in that coup by an Igbo officer. Many years later, I met him circumstantially because, incidentally, I'm actually married to a Northerner whose father was also an ex-soldier from the north, and it speaks to the interesting feature of what this country, what Nigeria actually is. It's not nearly as easily dimensioned in terms of Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, even though those ethnic tendencies are people take advantage of it. Mostly politicians, they take advantage of this seeming ethnic divide to push particular agenda. But there's a lot of cross-ethnic marriages, interaction, friendships that we enjoy. I grew up in Lagos, even though I was born in England. I grew up in Lagos. I went to school in Lagos before I went back to the UK to become a barrister there. And this is something that's quite common across the board. You have a lot of Northerners who grew up in Lagos. You have a lot of Northerners who are resident in the Southeast, and vice versa. And since the war ended, there's an attempt for the country to return to what it was. But I must sort of concede that this ethnic play continues to be a challenge that some people use to advance particular inconvenient agendas. But there's certainly more awareness of and about the Asaba Massacre, and there's certainly a certain degree of sympathetic sort of interaction with it. So I think that there are hopeful signs in that regard.
Mr. Nduka Eze, during your speech at the memorial anniversary of the Asaba Massacre in 2021, you said, quote, "We must teach our country that there may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." What does it mean to protest to you in this context?
Well, I can't imagine anything more degrading than to have something as fundamentally violating, like a massacre, like a pogrom, like a genocide, and being silenced. It's almost as though it's been done twice to you. So at the very least, when you have those sort of violations in any society. It's something that requires all hands on deck, to ensure that people know about it, that those who have done it are to some extent brought to book, that the proper lessons are learned from it to prevent its reoccurrence. So to have the sort of thing that we're describing take place, even within the context of a conflict, and you don't talk about it, and you're discouraged from talking about it, it's almost unspeakable. I can't even imagine that such a thing was allowed to happen here. So what I'm doing, and what others are also trying to support, is not being done with any sense of aggression, any sense of revenge. We're recording history. We're trying to educate our young people that the country has actually gone through a lot of tension in the past, that we can reposition, that we can go back to trying to instill within the average Nigerian what it means to be a Nigerian. The most important thing can't be that you're Igbo, or that you're Hausa, or that you're Yoruba. It's what sort of person are you, not what tribe you come from. You can see in other parts what these tribal allegiances have led to in the past. So that statement was made in the context that it's an unspeakable crime to have the sort of thing we're talking about happen. And there's even an attempt to prevent any conversations around it. It's just not a way of raising a healthy society.
Do you think it's possible for the Asaba people to forgive the Nigerian government, even if they never recognize the Asaba Massacre?
Well, it's a very interesting question because Asaba people are part of the Nigerian government. So you have Asaba people who have played significant roles in the Asaba governance structure, in the Nigerian governance structure. And that's the complexity of this space that we're discussing. As I speak, the Asaba people, there's this sense in which they feel terrible about what happened to them some time ago. But if you think about it, the Asaba today, if you come to Asaba, you would not have any sense that such a tragedy occurred. Asaba is a host to Delta State. And within Delta State is seen almost as a mini Nigeria, where you have all manner of other ethnic groups living side by side, coping harmoniously. So the place of Asaba Massacre, the feeling around it is not really that of anger against the Nigerian government. I think we're trying to use it generally to educate the country about just how far we have all come. And Asaba, there are also other atrocities that have happened in other parts of Nigeria. We identify with them. If it happens in the northern part of the country, there was a time when, I'm sure perhaps you read about the kidnap of a lot of young girls in the north. It was something, if you ask any Asaba person, he felt a sense of outrage about. So I think it certainly will be proper for the Nigerian government, even the present one, to look into that issue, try and understand it, so that at least the victims of all those people could feel that the people that died, had value. The people that died were somebody, right? It's healthy that should be done. I can't imagine the psychological burden the average victim in Asaba had weathered and had borne from 1967 to date. I'm sure those who are versed in psychology might be able to dictate certain traits if they're dealing with Asaba people. But the emphasis or the tendency in the average person is not really how to forgive the federal government of Nigeria. Because to some extent, there's a sense in which we've moved on a little, we've moved on, but we do want the proper things to happen. We do want, when they kidnapped all those young girls in the north, the federal government of Nigeria moved into action. They didn't just sit back and say, well, it's happened and let's forget about it. They did something about it. So terrible things will always happen from time to time. It's actually what we do about it that defines who we are, and defines the values that we'll sell to our children. So we haven't done right by Asaba. And you'll be surprised to know that that tendency is also replicated even in other parts of the country. So it's a disease, it's a malaise that needs to be checked. But we're all we're all Nigerians. So I don't know that there's anybody for me to forgive, or the soldiers behaved in the way they did at the time, because the atmosphere that was created made it possible. Is that atmosphere we're challenging?
There's so many things that I want to ask you right now, and I'm just trying to figure out which to start with. You talked about grief and grieving and honoring the dead. Typically, when somebody we love or is a family member dies, we bury them. We have a ceremony. We honor them. We honor their lives. Can you speak to the difficulties for Asabas to actually grieve their dead in a massacre that its own government that committed these crimes denies ever happened? I mean, there must be some difficulty, because part of the process of grief is coming to terms with what happened and recognizing that these things occurred. But when your own government says that it never happened or doesn't recognize it, how does that complicate the grieving process?
Right. I think the tendency from the Nigerian government is not necessarily to deny that it happened, because when I presented the petition before the Oputa panel that you referred to in your introduction, the panel, the commission, invited the federal government to come and explain what took place, because the petition was accepted, and the head of the army at the time was summoned to come and give an explanation, and they just simply did not appear. So that has been the pattern. Even recently, we have a new, the old Asaba of Asaba, the king of Asaba, died. So we have a new Asaba who had also been in the forefront of this memorial initiative, Professor Epifania Azinge. He's a very, very astute lawyer. He's a jurist. I recall that a military delegation were visiting Delta State, and the governor of the state had suggested that they go and visit the Asaba of Asaba. And so they went to see the Asaba of Asaba, and he raised the issue of what transpired with the army in the massacre. And they made very encouraging responses that they will look into it, they will come back. Indeed, that they would come, because they came on, I think it was September of last year, and the memorial of last year, of the previous year, was just about 3 weeks ago. So the Asaba said, how lovely that you're here. The memorial is coming up. We would like you to attend, because that's the spirit in which we're doing this. And they promised to attend. So the Asaba now asked me to extend officially an invitation to them. They just simply did not come. So the attitude had been avoidance, that perhaps if they avoided it and if they kept quiet about it, and if they pretended it never happened, they don't deny that it happened, but that if they played it in that way, perhaps eventually it will just go away. Now, you raise something that is actually quite central to what we feel about it. Asaba is a highly cultured place. We are very, very highly sort of structured traditions. When people die, the seeing people off, it's a whole ceremony that the town, takes part as a way of making a life whole. It's a way of justifying that person's existence. So you can imagine the challenge posed where 1,000 people are killed and no explanation given. The psychological impact on even the culture of the town cannot be overestimated. Cannot be underestimated, actually. It should be the other way around. So that issue that you raised is one of the reasons why we decided that it's important enough to educate our people that this sort of conduct on a wide level has huge implications for the progress of Nigeria, for the progress of any space. The Rwandan experience has been quite exemplary because a lot of effort officially went into trying to interrogate what went wrong there and how to reposition the country to ensure it does not happen again. They've made giant strides there. If you recall the South African Truth Commission, where people were encouraged to come out and speak to what they have done. It wasn't really essentially, that when you speak, you'll be forgiven, but it's felt that if somebody who has done those sort of things can be compelled to come out and speak openly about his conduct, that in itself makes that person go through a process. That in itself almost cleanses that person spiritually. This is not as a human being, there's a spiritual aspect and spiritual dimension to the life we live. So we have not done any of those things. And we think we can just carry on and ignore those things. If you study the problems that we have in our space, I'm sure there are linkages to issues like this, because there's a lot of deep suspicion between the tribes. There's a lot of deep suspicions, and kids grow up and people from different parts of the country say different things to their children, and until we can have a narrative, right, that focuses on truth and focuses intelligently on looking at these things in their proper perspective, and trying to make us learn from them, I think we'll continue to struggle. There's something else I need to mention to you. The whole idea behind that march was that they were marching, as it were, for the unity of the country. And some of them, whether by force of circumstances or voluntarily, were singing One Nigeria. They were singing One Nigeria as they went down to this square. So just imagine, they were singing One Nigeria with their own troops, moving in to this location, and only to get there to be desecrated. There's a sense in which we feel that One Nigeria was desecrated on that day. The essence of what it is to be a Nigerian was desecrated on that day by our own troops. So it's something that all of us have to acknowledge as a problem. And we must try and see what to do, to refocus. So my appeal is actually to Nigerians, like me, I'm a Nigerian, to other Nigerians, that this sort of issues cannot be glossed over because you do so at your own peril. You do so by living a pretense existence. We all pretend that all is well, but all is not well.
So typically, I would say a common response to a mass injustice targeted against a specific community um, you know, is one can expect that there would be animosity, there would be a sense of vengeance toward the people that committed that act. Um, and there's many instances across the world where one group is targeted in a series of mass killings, and then that group says, "Forget it. The government doesn't represent us. We're forming our own state." But in this case, I'm so impressed and mesmerized that the response is not the response to this massacre is not um, we're leaving, we're seeking independence because we can no longer function under the Nigerian state. The response is rather, from what you've said, is it's unity and reconciliation, even when the march for unity, the chance for one Nigeria, is when the massacre took place. So my question is, where do you find the strength personally to continue to push for unity and reconciliation, even after so much neglect um, and a failure to apologize on the part of the Nigerian government for this action? Where does that strength come to continue to push for a united Nigeria, for, as you said, one Nigeria, even after so many years of this massacre?
Right. Thank you so much for that question. I'm actually a product of that one Nigeria sort of atmosphere because I grew up in a house where my father, lived that life, so I was much influenced by the fact that growing up, the people I related to who came by the house were not necessarily just Igbos. We had Igbo friendships, we had Yoruba friendships, we had Hausa friendships. And as I indicated, despite the massacre, I ended up marrying somebody from the north who could be said to be from the other side. But clearly, that's not how I personally have related to it, albeit that's also circumstantial. Because I didn't plan to marry somebody from the north. I didn't plan to marry somebody whose dad was a soldier. And her dad, I also have a lot of respect because her dad is seen to be one of the finest of Nigerian soldiers. He's now late. So it's a function of what my own background had been. But then speaking generally for Asaba people, early education came to Asaba. I told you before that it was the center of the first administrative headquarters of the Royal Niger Company. Now, that's the company that acquired the space called Nigeria on behalf of the British Crown. So Asaba people had early exposure. So to some extent, they're able to interrogate, they're able to articulate, they're able to relate to particular things, not really in that only emotional sort of response. Oh, you've done this to me, I must do this to you. And what troubles them is the one or two things that I raised before. That when things go wrong, there are things that are done about them. But their response had not been, oh, we must seek revenge, we must do this, we must do this. Because Asaba people are also people who are highly integrated in the Nigerian sort of space. You have Asaba people, even till today, living in different parts of the country, doing extremely well. We have Asaba people in Lagos thriving, doing very well. So who do you begin to hate? Do you begin to hate your wife's relation? Do you begin to hate your in-law? Do you begin to? So there's that comforting complexity, right, around it that has made it not so easy for people to just do the usual, which is this happened to us, therefore this is the solution. Because the solution has not come easy at all, because there are people who are highly integrated and highly socialized. But having said that, it does not actually obviate the need for the wider society to recognize their own responsibilities. I sometimes have to say this even to my Yoruba Hausa friends, that you have a responsibility to respond in a particular way if something happens even outside of your own space. The same way I have a responsibility to respond in a particular way if something happens in the north or in the southwest and all that. That is how to actually develop a society that has a chance to thrive. So I think we found the strength from what we are. As our people have always been people who are very open, despite the atrocity I spoke to you. Asaba is the capital of Delta State. Delta has no less than about 20 tribes. And they're all, if you come into Asaba, the indigenous population is probably 15-20% of Asaba. The governor of Delta State is not from Asaba and has never been from Asaba. So it kind of gives you a sense of the, I would say, sophistication of the people. But they're human, and they're still, entitled to those human appreciations, those human understanding, those the things that make us what we are as human beings. If things happen to you, you can't say because you feel this way, you feel that way, that your own responsibility to relate to it positively is it can be excused. But it's actually a very, very tough. It's been a tough lesson that they had to learn because it can't have been easy in the 70s and the 80s. The war ended. The federal government was very, 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 very not very sympathetic and not very Nigeria oriented in terms of positioning the country properly to be able to recover from what had been a very major challenge, to the structure of the country. They did not do things properly at all when the war ended. They touted, issues about reconciliation, reconstruction, and blah, blah, blah. But, they didn't really do much to advance it. But Nigerians themselves, I think, generally have tried in different ways to do what the government ought to have done. But there's still a lot that needs to be done to make it whole. It's not very, sometimes somebody says, oh, yeah, 8,000 people were killed, but that's a long time ago. That's the wrong attitude. Because somebody who's lost a mother, somebody who's lost a father, somebody who's lost a brother, somebody who has lost community members can't relate to it in terms of, that was a long time ago. They relate to it every day. So the sort of things we expect to be in the Asaba space now is a proper monument, is a proper something that is done that make us feel, following this horrible thing. This was done by other Nigerians as a way of showing some sympathetic association, with other parts, with the other part of Nigeria. So we haven't done enough. It's not good enough as well to say, oh, Asaba people have recovered. They don't. They've moved on. They don't remember. Nobody really moves on. Grief essentially remains with you, becomes part of you. You live with it, right? So the fact that it's, that, oh, you were able to carry on with life is not enough. It's not good enough. There are things we need to do. We need to do it for that issue. But we need to do it in relation to other challenges that we've been facing. We just do tend to carry on in Nigeria. Things happen and people read about it and we just carry on as though they don't matter. I believe is that attitude, right, of the massacre and such challenges that has infiltrated into our mental culture that now makes Nigerians feel that nothing matters.
That was actually going to be my last question is, what does this mean for Nigeria as a country? Because you've said the Civil War was a war of national unity, and yet Nigerian troops rounded up and killed their fellow civilians in Asaba. And I was going to ask you, but you just touched on it, is how does this reflect wider problems in Nigerian society and challenges of unity in Nigeria that persist even today?
Well, I think what we're actually dealing with is essentially dishonesty. Is dishonesty. Um, if we're truthful to ourselves, we look each other in the eye and we tell each other the truth. I began by telling you about the coup, and I did acknowledge, even though I'm Igbo, I did acknowledge that there was a feeling. That feeling had some foundation that these Igbo officers, mostly Igbo officers, not only Igbo officers, had orchestrated this coup. The coups, by their very nature, are highly secretive things. But the fact that they're evils matters, right? And they did carry out a coup where they killed a leader, a highly revered leader in the north, and some other highly respected leaders in that space. They killed some highly revered leaders in other parts of the country. But they did not kill the leader that's perceived to be from their own zone. It created a lot of suspicion, right? So at the very, very root of what we're dealing with is an inability to engage the truth. Because that's actually what makes you whole. If you can be honest with yourself, if you can be honest with your own people, if you can be honest about what you're doing and why you're doing it, then there's a chance. At the moment, there's almost an orchestrated level of dishonesty and foul play and cover-ups. I'll tell you, there's something I remember. You know, I had an art exhibition. We assembled 25 leading artists in Nigeria to interrogate the Asaba Massacre, each coming from his own perspective, you know, because art is such a wonderful platform that can be used to challenge, you know, received opinion. So all these chaps came up with their own interpretations. On that day, we had a school visit on the day we're opening the exhibition. Some children came. And you see, when you relate to children, you see just how simple things can be. So we had a presentation on the Asaba Massacre to them, and they were very curious. And if there was one question, quite a number of them kept repeating. It's, yes, so what happened to the soldiers that perpetrated this, that did this? And being able to actually respond to that question, knowing that it's children who are asking you this question, knowing that these are people that are going to own this space that we call Nigeria. And you just related to them something almost unmentionable that has taken place. And they put that question to you. So what happened? I had a responsibility not just to say nothing. I had to say something that these kids can take away without being totally in despair, right? But it's just like children to relate to issues in that way. And to some extent, there's that child in us. There should be that child in all of us. Something has taken place. Deal with it honestly. Because if you can deal with it honestly, you can move on. But once you play this game of dishonesty, cover up, pretend, you really can't move on. Even when you think you've moved on, you really can't move on. It's difficult to explain to anybody why it is that the then president of Nigeria, Murtala Mohammed, who orchestrated this Asaba Massacre, and his deputy were in two different locations in 1975. And a coup, not sponsored by Igbos, a coup sponsored by Northerners took place. And these were the only two people killed. One was killed in Lagos. The other one was killed in Kwara, almost 6 hours away. I've puzzled about this. Why is it that it's these two gentlemen who orchestrated the Asaba Massacre that were the only two people killed in what was called the Dimka coup? I don't understand how it is, because they were not sitting together, they were not in the same place, but it just happens to be the two people that led this second division. And there is no connection between what transpired in 1966 and 1967 in Asaba and the coup that took place and led by Northern officers against a regime led by a Northern officer. But some of these things make you rather curious, right? That there's much more to this life that we live than meets the eye. And so when you relate to it by thinking you can control all the elements with dishonesty, you have paradoxes like this.
It's almost biblical, I must say, like in the sense that I can think of a number of stories where a king or a brother or somebody commits an act of injustice, denies it, thinks they can get away with it, and then lo and behold, something happens to them and strikes them down because they thought that they could get away with, not telling the truth, and eventually the truth came out.
Yes, there are. Yes, so sorry. Somebody hearing me might think I'm relating to that with a sense of triumphalism, with a sense of, oh, they've got their just desert. I relate, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that they were killed in that way, right? That's the way I relate to it as a human being. But in terms of looking at them as leaders, and in terms of saying that people must be held accountable for the things they do. So on that plane, I begin to interrogate why it is that their end was like that, considering the issue that we're relating to, that they played such a crucial role. On the one hand, when he became president, he tried to do some meaningful things. He tried to instill some discipline into Nigerians. It was a very short-lived administration, but it was quite effective. But there's this past, right? And there's this past that he never accounted for. There's this past that people try to wish away. There's this past that remained a sore point, right? And the life of everybody is actually, not just the good things you've done, but everything must be weighed in the balance. So these are not very easy and accessible subjects to make sense of, but we are adults and we need to deal with them.
Mr. Nduka Eze, this has been a fascinating conversation, and one where there's so many lessons that I think we can draw from, not just within Nigeria, but in all across the world, and maybe even to the other October 7th that people know in infamy. There's a lot of lessons that we can draw there. So I thank you so much for that. I understand that you have a documentary film that is set to premiere in October about the Asaba Massacre, and I just wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the documentary and the project and what you're seeking to accomplish with it, and where those who are interested could find it, should they want to see it in October.
Thank you so much. In the past 3 years, we began a journey of putting the entire thing together. based on the two books. That the first book we relied on was a book by an Asaba indigene who is now late, Professor Emile Kocha. He wrote a book called the Blood on the Niger. Then Professor Liz Bird and Fraser Altonelli, building on that book, did a much more comprehensive research and produced their book. So when they finished their book, they posed the question to me, because I was part and parcel of the research team and people that assisted them in moving around the country. They interviewed people on all sides, both past leaders from Biafra, past leaders from Nigeria. It was a very, very comprehensive effort. And so they said to me, so Chuck, so what's next? We'll finish our work. Is that all there is to it? Are you people actually going to do something with it? And I said to her, yes, it's a continuum. There's much to do, and we'll continue to do and build on all the efforts of all these great people that have come to try and assist Nigeria, because it's not necessarily Asaba that was being assisted. They are assisting Nigeria in understanding her own past. So about 3-4 years ago, we now started this documentary, and it's essentially a whole swathe of Nigerians from different parts of the country, including Professor Wole Soyinka, the Nobel laureate. He also gave his own he made his own contribution. So after about 3 years, we now have something that is going to premiere at the African Center. Somebody has asked, why are you taking why are you taking the premiere to London? Why not Nigeria? Why not Lagos? Why not Asaba? Why not Abuja? And it seemed to us that 7th of October has become a date that the world is relating to. They're relating to it everywhere. But there's also a 7th of October that the world is not relating to at all. And there's also a lesson that our own 7th of October can teach the other 7th of October. Because as you can see, the conflict continues there. Both sides don't see themselves as human. There's no level of atrocity that one side cannot commit against the other. And that's what played out in Asaba. Asaba was meant to be obliterated. It was meant to be, the male population were meant to be done away with. But you go to Asaba today, it's a town that is thriving. It's a town that recovered. It just speaks to the majesty of life. It speaks to the majesty of what it is to be human. So Asaba has a lot to teach both the Israelis and the Palestinians and Hamas and all the rest of them. Asaba has a lot, because Asaba was once a desecrated city like Gaza. And I'm in difficulties when I'm relating to the October 7th in Palestine, because there's so much complexity to that history. There's so much that has gone wrong there. There's so much interplay of dishonesty by the international community. And it's still that dishonesty that I see playing out in what is happening in Palestine today. Both sides don't tell themselves the truth. The international community plays the game depending on which particular color suits them at a particular time. But truth is buried. So what you have, both the Palestinians, the Arabs, and the Jews, they are victims of what is playing out there. They're victims. In the same way that I see Asaba people and Nigerians as a whole as victims on what played out in Asaba. So that story and the fact that Asaba could recover, and Asaba did recover, and there is life after even what is happening in Palestine. There's life. And there's a life that is going to be lived even in that space. That's the lesson we're taking to London, to teach the international community that once there was also this type of dishonesty that was played out in that little space that was once the capital of Nigeria, the headquarters of the Royal Niger Company. They played out some major game there, and almost an entire community was decimated, was a ghost town, but you wouldn't know it today. So it's a message of hope to both Arabs and the Israelis that if they could just stop and think for a moment and look within their own humanity, they might just be able to tell each other the truth and stop the game and try and live together, because that's what they're going to do ultimately. But it appears that they want to cause as much bloodshed to themselves as possible before they get to where they should be. I hope that there will be some decent opinion that's able to make both sides pull back and speak to their humanity so that they can have a chance in the way Asaba has been able to come back and to teach this lesson of survival and resilience. That's the message of London. And one of the most interesting aspects of the location that we chose is that the chairman of the board of trustee of the Africa Center is a gentleman called Oba Nsugbe. He's actually a QC, now a KC, a King's Counsel. And he's from Asaba. And his grandfather, his mom's father, was killed in the Asaba Massacre. He's based in the UK. He's made his life in the UK and is the person hosting the film premiere. And the king of Asaba, who has this is just his first year anniversary of his coronation, will be traveling to chair that function. We feel that we have something we can offer the world from the pain we have gone through.
Mr. Nduka Eze, I know we're talking about a massacre, but there's something so incredibly beautiful about the message that you guys are trying to get across to not just Nigeria, but the world as a result of this massacre and the reconciliation. And it's really inspiring, I must say, to hear about the way that you guys are proceeding. I'm very touched. I really am. Where can people, if they're not at the premiere on October 25th, where can they find this documentary if they would like to see it?
Well, thank you very much. We have a website. It's www.asabamemorialmonument.com. www.asabamemorialmonument.com. We'll be posting details of the film in that website. There's also another website by Liz Bird, the University of South Florida, who sponsored the book on Asaba Massacre. They also have their own website. We'll post the details of the film documentary in there. And there are a lot of other details in relation to this matter that's already in that website. And I would really love to encourage people to have a look at it.
I will put a link in the description as well to that website and to all the materials that you've sent me in the past and that we've discussed, so that people who want to explore those can. And I do second that, encouraging everybody listening to go and check out all of those resources. Okay, well, Mr. Nduka Eze, this has been an absolute pleasure of mine, and I thank you so much for getting through all the technical difficulties that we had in the beginning and making this work. This was really, really, really wonderful. And I wish you all the luck and success with the documentary, and in getting this message across to the world, really, and to getting the Asaba Massacre the recognition that it deserves. Um, so just thank you so much again.
Well, why can I say that? I mean, it's a unique opportunity for me to be able to speak to this. It's not always very easy to talk about it, but I know that one needs to talk about it. And if those deaths can mean something to somebody somewhere, then perhaps it's not been in vain. So thank you for giving me the platform to be able to do this, and to put this across to other people who might benefit from it. Thank you.
The pleasure is mine. Okay, I will hit the end to the record button.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye. I'll send you the link and all the details when I um, publish it. So you'll have that, and obviously we have each other's email. So if we need to uh, stay in touch or anything, just shoot me an email.
I'll send you further materials as they arise. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.
And you too. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.